So my name is Pam Zaabel. I'm with the Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State University, and I'll be moderating the session today. Up there I work on pig projects and have been spending a lot of time trying to help producers prepare using resources in the Secure Pork Supply Plan. So I'll start by giving a kind of a brief overview of the functional exercise so that we're all on the same page what was happening every day in the exercise. And then we'll go to our speakers one by one, and I'll introduce them prior to their talk. And then after we're all done with our presentations, then we'll open it up for questions that you can ask our fantastic panelists here what they thought of different things in the exercise and their experience. So it was called the Swine Fever Exercise for Agriculture Response, kind of like that acronym SFEAR. We affectionately all refer to it as the ASF functional exercise because that's much easier to refer to than always worrying about saying sphere. The exercise was a USDA exercise. It took the year in planning. There were other exercises leading up to this one to make sure that they had all the policies and a well-planned exercise because it was going to be on such a large scale. 14 states participated, the top 14 swine production states in the United States. You can see them there on the map. All right. I have 5 kids. I thought I could talk loud enough without it, but they'd be excited to hear that I actually needed a microphone. So 14 states, you can see them in green on the map, the top 14 production hog-producing states in the United States. The exercise was a 4-day exercise, a combination of functional exercises and drills, and there was participation from all levels, from federal, state, and local agencies, as well as industry. It was angled at engaging all participants of the industry, at the laboratory, at the state and federal levels, and to target key areas of the ASF response and mitigation. So here's how it was broken out by the days. On day 1 was the foreign animal disease investigation and diagnostic testing. Day 2 addressed movement standstill. Day 3 was depopulation and disposal, and day 4 was the permitted movements, and we'll break those up a little bit more detail. So in day 1, what happened was that the swine producers in each of the states were contacted their state animal health official, reporting concerns over unusual sickness in their animals. And then a foreign animal disease diagnostician, so that is someone that has been specially trained to look for the clinical signs associated with foreign animal diseases and to go out and collect samples to test those animals, to send them off to be tested at the lab. So those FADDs traveled to the site to investigate those clinical signs. And these foreign animal disease investigations, they happen all the time right now in the United States. Anytime a producer is concerned, or it could happen at the packing plant, it could happen at a buying station, anywhere that there's a clinical sign that's of concern, you can call the state animal health official, and they will send someone out to investigate to make sure, and you don't hear about them because they are not foreign animal diseases. But that's the important thing, is that they were investigated and that those foreign animal diseases were ruled out. So this isn't unusual for the investigations to occur because we want to be vigilant and make sure that we catch a foreign animal disease the minute it gets in our country. So the foreign animal disease diagnostician traveled to the site to investigate, and then they conducted what we call a foreign animal disease investigation. So they looked at the animals, they asked questions, they went and collected samples, and they actually, for the exercise, delivered them to the National Animal Health Laboratory Network Lab. So for here, there's 2 places that these samples go. In Iowa, they go to Ames, to the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, 1 set of samples. And the other set of samples will be put on an airplane and sent out to Plum Island, or the Animal Disease Center there, for additional testing. So they like to have them tested at 2 different places to make sure that they get the same results. And so the labs practice that sample accession and the communication of those results. So then we moved on to day 2, and day 2 started with an announcement of African swine fever in the United States. Again, this was the exercise. So what happened was states started to initiate movement standstills. It may have been states at different times during the day. Some states started with a grace period. Some states had a grace period of 8 hours, some had 12 hours, but the standstill for the most part was 72 hours. So there was a lot of discussion as to what time that grace period started, what was included in that movement standstill. Did it include feed? Did it include animals? Did it include semen? And some of that differed state to state, so that there was a little discrepancy there for producers, especially that have production in different states, to track what was being included in the movement standstill in the different states. And then what did it look like when that was released? So as a site was determined, or a state or an area was determined that they were not infected with the disease, how did that movement standstill be released in that area? Day 3 began with depopulation and disposal of what we called our infected sites. So again, all part of the exercise, we pretended that some of these sites were infected. And what did it look like when the state sent personnel to those production sites to talk about their depopulation and disposal plans, and what the indemnity would look like for their site, and how they would handle the situation on those sites. So there was a lot of planning and logistics that happened between the personnel in the field and the incident management team, which are the team that's assigned to help manage the disease on that site. So that'll be something that our panelists will talk about, how they viewed that and the discussions that they had in moving forward with the play of depopulating and disposing of their animals. And then day 4, the final day, was the permitted movement day. So for sites that were not infected with the disease but were caught up in a quarantine area because they had sites in the area that were infected, they submitted movement permit requests. So they had to take steps to make sure to show the animal health officials that they were not infected and that they did not have contact with infected sites, to try to show them that they were a minimal risk movement, that it was safe to allow them to move their animals. So our panelists will talk a little bit about what that looked like as far as preparing to show that they were minimal risk, to ask for that movement permit, and then maybe they could give a little insight too as we talk about, so they applied for that movement permit, and then the state had to approve it or deny it. And if they got any feedback, if they were denied, and if they were approved, then they would have had a movement permit and they would have been allowed to move their animals either to the next stage of production or to the packing plant. So again, this was an exercise. The idea was that participants were able to perform the activities that they would be expected to do in a real outbreak. So we've been talking about our plans for many years, whether it be foot and mouth disease or African swine fever, and how we would respond to these. And we have a lot of plans in place, and we kind of think we may know how they work, but sometimes until you have that face-to-face contact and really have to make some of those tough decisions, then you really know a little bit better how it all might play out with your decision and your planning, and how you can improve, right? That's part of the goal of the exercise, is we look for areas that we can put our strengths, and we look for areas that we need to improve on so that we can continue planning. So that's what participants did. They determined strengths and weaknesses. Our producers, I think, probably determined where that they could improve, and I think our animal health officials and our labs probably also came to the conclusion where that they could improve as we continue to prepare for a possible case of African swine fever. All right. So now we're going to move to our panel, and the first person that's going to be talking on our panel today is Heidi Vidit. Heidi is a producer from Washington, Iowa. She and her husband Jerome have been working together for the past 40 years, and they say some days work better than others. They work with about 85 employees and 40 contract growers in a 9-county range in southeast Iowa.
Thank you, Pam. Okay, so the exercise is kind of, if you make the comparison, it's kind of like the fire drill. But before we start talking about our experience with the fire drill, I thought I would kind of brief you on some of the things that we had done more about fire prevention than the fire drill itself. So, as you all know, it was August of 18 when ASF was identified in China, and as soon as that started to happen, you know, one episode, 2 episodes, and you're kind of like curious about it, but it was very quickly clear that this had become a real issue over there. And, you know, we're a global world now, and so the likelihood that all of the traffic that happens between China and the United States, the concept that it could be brought to the United States seemed reasonably believable. So using the things that we had learned from when we had PED back in 14 or 15 or both, we kind of took the idea to work on the things that were within our control and used a parallel with PED, even though I know that they are not the same disease, but that unlike flu, for example, that is potentially blowing from one side of the globe to the other, that a lot of this was within our control as far as keeping ASF or foreign animal disease out of our herd. And with that in mind, really, we said there's really 3 things that we need to focus on better. So one of the things that we wanted to improve our focus on was our barn biosecurity, establishing better clean and dirty lines, better use of boots and coveralls, disinfectant, that type of thing. The second thing was about locking the doors so that the animals that we want in the barn are in the barn and the animals we don't want are outside of the barn. And the third thing then was our using a clean trailers to do top outs. And these are limited strategies because, again, we're working on what can we control and what can we not. And many years ago I heard a talk by Barb Straw where she said, you know, it was when power washing in your barns was kind of still a new thing. We didn't wash between turns back in the day. And she pointed out that some washing was better than no washing. And that even if, so people would say, well, I don't have time to do that between turns. Well, do you have time to do some washing? Can you wash one room? Back, you know, we used to have smaller rooms. And that, to use the phrase, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. So what was it within our control were those 3 things. So I'll talk a little bit about those. So the first thing was about the boots and coveralls and the Virkon foot baths. You guys might all be totally faithful to good biosecurity in the barns and changing your boots and all that business. But I can tell you that I have observed myself many people who run into a barn, get back in their truck, and go to the next barn to chore. That's horrifying, kinda, but it's reality. It's what I see people do. So one of the things we did is, you know, the grain markets in the fall of 18 weren't good, and so we bought the coveralls, we bought the boots, we bought the Virkon, we bought the dip pans, we bought the mats so people could stand on something when they're changing their boots. And I think we spent somewhere around $23,000 doing that, which at first it's like, well, what's so hard about that? Well, because not everybody's the same size, and not everybody likes the same kind of boots, and all these different kinds of things that I talk about how dumb we were, but we were really that dumb to think this wouldn't be that hard. But it was kind of hard to get get people set up and stuff like that. But the biggest eye-opener in this was how hard it was to get people to put the coveralls on, put the boots on, use the dip pans. And if you guys know Virkon's yellow when you mix it up. So it's like, it's supposed to look like Mountain Dew, not Diet Pepsi, you know, and getting people to change the foot baths. These are not difficult things. These are simple things, but I did not anticipate how hard it would be, especially with a fear factor going of, well, this ASF is a real deal. Why wouldn't people do the stuff we were asking them to? We'll get to that, I guess. And we ran into things that we didn't expect, like, I can't do that. What about, I take my kids with me when I chore. So buy some boots for your kids and get some coveralls for your kids then. Finding people with their dog in the barn. So none of these are earth-shaking things, but they represent actual elements of risk if you're trying to have biosecurity in a barn. Some people are inflexible, and so putting on coveralls, they can't do this thing to pull coveralls up over their shoulders. Buy some scrubs. But you can do better than getting in and out of your truck and just tracking manure from one building to another. One thing, I didn't have any pictures here, but some people said, oh, I don't have anywhere to do it. I don't have a workroom in my barn. So we just took a gate bracket and moved the gate back 2 feet and then made a gate bracket for the gate side. That was for the wall side. And then it's like, so you got 2 more feet to work with here. So if we are well intended in trying to do good basic biosecurity, boots, coveralls, dip pan, there are certainly ways to accommodate that. So that was the first step that we took. The second thing was about securing the barn boundaries. Again, your line of separation if you do your secure pork supply plan. I did not have any idea on this one either how many things that we would find that potentially breach your barn boundaries. For example, when you get to looking how many people's doors are rotted out at the ends, like on your end doors, maybe it's not your highly trafficked door, but there's plenty of opportunity not just for rodents to get in, but other animals to get in once you start looking. And I also, we put exterior locks on the doors, and okay, so then, well, where's the field man going to get the key? Again, these seem like pretty basic things, but the strength of any kind of a biosecurity program is about basic things being done faithfully every day. So we ended up, if you want to get broke into, and if there's any infiltrators in the room right now, you can figure out about where to look for people's keys for their buildings, because everybody puts them in the same place. I'll do us a favor and not say where, but you know what I'm talking about. So for $20 you can buy a key box and put a code on it, and then you can at least have your keys. I'm sure a well-intended infiltrator can get your key box open too, though. Making sure that we lock interior doors. Another discovery that we had was, once that you establish your clean and dirty line inside your workrooms, how easy it is that if you have pigs, you know, the same pigs that can flip a latch and get out of the building can flip a latch and get into your workroom. Well, that kind of undoes what your clean and dirty line is, as well as wrecking up all your stuff you got in your workroom. And the other thing is, especially if you have workrooms that don't have slats, you have solid cap in your workrooms, you can manage to have a very lowly ventilated space, and the pigs can get out of the pens and push the door shut. So if you haven't had that happen yet, good, that's a good thing. But if you're going to lock your barns, you should also be thinking about locking your interior doors, just for the sake of keeping your pigs away from the clean dirty line and in the rooms. The third thing was about going to clean trailer top outs. And again, there's nothing revolutionary about this, but it's harder than it sounds, because keeping ahead of keeping all your trailers washed is a deal. So if for any of you that is within the scope of your own operations, it's a big undertaking. And it was also a big undertaking because, you know, you start to try to push the limits of how to do your top outs, so that if you're only going to go there with a clean trailer for top outs, and then you're going to dump the barn, what's going to potentially be the cost to you in your sort loss. So that was the third learning that we had. We did get our secure pork supply plans all done in the summer of 19 in anticipation of doing the exercise in the fall. That part was fine. And then the other thing we did was enrolled all of our sites in the EMERS database. And EMERS stands for Emergency Management Response System, I think, with USDA. And that's been a very handy list to have, because we found a lot of gaps where we didn't have the correct premise ID. And I've used that list for my weekly submission to rendering and a lot of other things. So getting a good cleaned up premises list was very helpful. So I guess that was a collateral benefit of being in the exercise. So then we did the exercise. That was fine. Pam walked through what the different days' activities were. The thing I want to say about the exercise was it was easy. It was easy because it was for pretend. So when they say, what are you going to use for your method of mass disposal, I think that's what the term is, what are you going to do? You say, I'm going to use barn shutdown, or I'm going to do this. And then when you say, well, where are you going to bury the mortalities, you call the DNR and they say, okay, fine. And the landowner on whose ground you're going to bury these says, okay, fine. because at that level, it was still all for pretend. At the level that we have a real outbreak, it will not be this easy. And I have to admit that in the exercise by day 4, I was kind of tired of it. I mean, it's fatiguing. It wasn't even for real, and it was fatiguing. So, and there was only 3 operations. So when you think about what would it mean if we had 30 operations and it was for real, how quickly people's resolve to do good basic stuff faithfully every single day, how quickly that's going to change. The other thing was we did the exercise in September, and in September it's really nice out and it's not hard to do good biosecurity in September. On the other hand, if you got a foot of snow or your barns are froze shut and every other thing, it will be very hard to do right biosecurity. So I think that's something that we need to be thinking about. And the other thing that I think is really important is everybody was on board. You know, we're at our table. We're ready to take your call, like a telethon. Well, the reality is, if you're going to be geared up for ASF or foreign animal disease of any kind 24/7, 365, when a practitioner calls in with what they think are symptoms 24/7, 365, somebody's got to be ready and able to begin the execution of, is this ground zero? And I think we have work to do, because this is going to be like working at Strategic Air Command, that you're there forever and ever and hope that all the things that you've practiced for don't come to pass. And the last thing that I want to add in as a participant is the most common question that I've gotten from contract growers this year, in the time when there was the extension meetings and all that leading up to the exercise itself. The question on everybody's lips is, well, if something happens, will I still get paid? Well, newsflash, the only way that people get paid, in the pig industry in general, forget ASF, is when the person who owns the pigs has revenue from the pigs that they can use to pay. So it would seem self-evident that good biosecurity, maintaining your barn borders, is a really key way to assure that we don't have the disease, and so you can maintain that stream of payments that everyone is concerned about. And we have to be mindful, because in the segmentation of our industry, it's been very easy to get a sense of, well, I don't have risk because I'm a contract grower. But you do have risk, and to mitigate that risk, the best thing that you can do is cooperate with the biosecurity protocols, cooperate with the keeping your barns locked and those sort of things, because there isn't a we and us in the swine industry. If we get ASF, we're all we. So be mindful of that and do the basic things every day. That was the main experience we had.
All right, thank you, Heidi. Heidi's been working really hard this last year of getting prepared for this exercise and getting biosecurity on the sites. And we both referred to the Secure Pork Supply Plan. And if you're wondering about those resources, it's at securepork.org. And it has a lot of biosecurity and surveillance and other kinds of resources there for your use. Our next individual on the panel is Dr. Ian Leavis. He received his DVM from Iowa State University and worked for Seaboard Foods from 2002 until 2013. He also worked for Iowa Select Farms for a period of time and then returned to Seaboard Foods in 2016 as part of the Iowa expansion.
Thank you. We kind of split these talks up today and decided to go at them from different angles. And so the piece that I was going to speak to is centered more around things that we encountered or we learned during the exercise, and probably some bigger lingering questions in everyone's minds, and the biggest areas of opportunity. So I'll say this is probably my point of view and opinion to some point, so others may think differently. But As we started into the exercise, we participated with a finisher site, and so the first day we had the foreign animal disease diagnosticians come out to the site to collect some tissues, go through the site, and part of that visit then was doing an initial epi investigation for the site. Probably one of the first and biggest surprises for me as we started that out was they started asking a lot of questions about movements on and off that site that's a potential infected premises. And over the years, working for one of the large companies, I've always felt like we've got a pretty good handle. We know when our pigs move, where they're going. We've got that in the scheduling department. Our feed mills, we've got the feed orders and we can track that. As we worked through that, though, it was a pretty nice day that day. We'd had quite a bit of rain. We're standing there talking. They asked about tractors or any agricultural equipment on and off the site, and it wasn't manure pumping time yet, so I didn't think anything about it. And then as you look around, you get to thinking, well, I wonder who mows the grass. And so it's a pretty low risk, low priority thing that it wouldn't be your first thing you jump to in an epi traceback, but it was one of the first things that highlighted for me that there's a lot of things we probably haven't thought about even within our own organization. So I call our guys up that handle our grounds maintenance. I said, who mows the site? They gave me the name of the contractor that mows that site, and I said, well, does he mow other sites for us? Yeah, he mows about 6, 7 other sites, and he mows the grass at the feed mill, and pretty sure that he mows grass for several other producers, companies in the area as well. They're all close. And so right away, the epi traceback on a low priority deal gets pretty big. Expand that out to a toll mill that's supplying multiple producers in multiple areas throughout the state, and their ability to trace back through loads on where did this truck go, in what order, what farms did it visit. All that stuff is probably took for granted to some extent, and when you really start thinking about it, I think it's one of the areas that we as producers have to hold ourselves accountable for and hold our toll mills, our suppliers accountable for, supply delivery trucks. I'm not even going to get into the UPS guy that drops our supplies off at some of the sites and where he's been and gone, because I'm pretty sure he's not wearing plastic boot covers. But there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of touches on a farm that nobody even thinks about, even when you're in a system that you think is pretty biosecure. So that was one of the main things, I think, for me and for our company coming out of that, is there's a lot of little things that we probably need to have a better understanding of and better control over, or at least know what's going on and help to direct those movements. I think one of the other points is how quickly could you access that data? Throughout the course of the exercise, it was played over the 4 different days. In reality, that's going to be a simultaneous, moving, living, breathing thing. We kind of had a stop at the end of each day. Everybody got to go home, have supper, have a nice evening. Probably not going to be the reality. You're probably going to be stuck at your office somewhere and doing your epi tracebacks and sorting out who all has been at that site. But if you think about your own operations, if you're a producer, how quickly could you track that information down? Is that something that you have readily available that is in some form or fashion that could be provided to the animal health officials so that they can do the epi investigation trace back? Because what that leads into is you go into the 72-hour stop movement, and Iowa kind of threw us a curveball in the exercise. I'd never even considered that they might stop movement on feed, but they did. At first, I was kind of upset about that, and I think a lot of the other participants were kind of, where the heck did this come from? But it at least created good discussion from an industry standpoint on what if they do stop feed movements, what's the effect of that? I think really Iowa was trying to understand from the industry what is the effect, and also push the industry to think about how would we handle that and deal with that, because that's a big issue today. If you think about it from a public perception standpoint, if we as an industry couldn't move feed for 3 days, I go back to the blizzard last winter where we didn't deliver feed for about a day and a half, and the backlog of movements that creates and the issues that creates, 3 days gets to be a pretty long time frame. And there's a public perception piece then of that too, so you're not moving feed. How are we going to deal with that? How do we handle that? The reason I asked brought up the point about how quickly could you access all of your touches your traceback information, people in and off, equipment in and off, that's going to be directly tied if you're one of these sites and how quickly they potentially clear your site or other sites within your system to resume those movements. The shutdown time frame is set up to stop everything, not move anything, understand where the disease is and isn't as much as possible, and then start movements up again in a careful and calculated way. That all comes directly back to how quickly the industry can provide them the information that they need to ascertain which permits should and shouldn't be granted. One of the biggest, I think, concerns for the industry, the government, everyone out there is just the testing capacity that we have today at our known labs. Someone made a comment, and I think Pam was even the one that told me maybe during the exercise, that on the second day as they were going through the 72-hour stop movement and started looking into tracebacks, testing of sites, and that Minnesota, for the site that they were playing in the exercise, their test requests the first day alone would have maxed out Minnesota, South Dakota State, and part of Iowa State's lab for the testing capacities we have today. That was one site in one state. And it maxed out the testing capacity of 2.5 of the, I would argue, the largest diagnostic labs for swine samples in the United States. We have a huge issue in our testing capacity across all labs. That comes down to the number of reagents that are available or test kits that they have to run those tests. There's going to need to be, and people are working on it. I mean, I would point out quickly that this has pushed a lot of discussion and work amongst industry, government, the labs, and that since the exercise, because it did highlight the concern for everyone. But we've got to sort out, how do we prioritize? What's the priority? How do we ramp up testing capabilities quickly? How much should we have on hand? How much will we need? How quickly can they get it to us once it's here, if it's here? That's probably the first of my big main concerns. I'll get to the second one in a little bit. So you move into the third day, and we started talking about depop and disposal and working through there's a depop and disposal plan, which then leads into the indemnity plan that they played in the exercise, or the payment plan for loss of animals. There's a lot of questions around what's clean after an ASF outbreak. As we were working through the depopulation portion of that, I'd always kind of been under the assumption that under an emergency there would be the ability to access lands for burial and disposal. In the state of Iowa, according to the way the regulations are written today, there is no eminent domain in that situation, and so it's the producer's responsibility to have a burial site, have a plan for that if you choose to bury it. If you choose to compost, give some thought as to what would be your composting material. One of the states, I think might have been Minnesota again, put composting in as their method of disposal for the carcasses on the site that they depopped. I think they said they sucked up about 3 states worth of composting materials for that one site. So basically every carbon source in the 3 state surrounding area went to one farm to compost those animals. So if it's a large outbreak and everybody's planning on doing composting, I'm not sure where. It's going to be a fight for who gets the material, and it's going to be gone in a hurry. So we have to work. There's a depopulation and disposal working group that's a joint effort between national and state groups, pork boards. It's trying to answer some of those questions. Another question that came up as you're going through that, never thought about, if you're cleaning a site that's been infected with a foreign animal disease, manure is part of that. So there has to be a plan for how you're going to dispose of the manure. As we talked with them, their expectation is that the pit gets cleaned too. So that would be complete emptying and cleaning of a deep pit on the site that we picked. I'd never even given that any thought, to be honest with you. I'm still not quite sure what the answer is on that one. I guess the other side is, and some of the people are doing research now, is are there chemicals that we could put in the pits to help sterilize the leftover manure or solids that are in those pits? Still a lot of unanswered, unknown questions in this whole exercise. The last day when they start talking about resumption of movements, this would probably be the second largest area of concern that I had, because we do have to get back up and going. We have to move forward as an industry and have a plan for that. There was 14 different states playing. There hadn't necessarily been a lot of interaction on that in the past, I don't think. We got to the fourth day, and every state had a different set of testing requirements. They wanted a different set of samples or a different number of samples. They wanted them collected on a week out from movement. Some states said 3 days. Some said wanted 2 sets. It's not just large companies. There's a lot of people that are moving pigs from state to state on commuter herd agreements. That's part of the normal movements today. One of the big pushes from several people in the industry, I think state boards and that, is having the state animal health officials work towards a comprehensive plan that encompasses all states that would be acceptable to each of those states. I know the state vets, the 14 main ones, have been having meetings and working through some of those discussions as well of what is a standard set of tests so that they're all using the same playbook for that moving forward. And we're not trying to jump through hoops to figure out which states want this test and when. Again, that'll come back to when you start talking about movements, the testing capacity and capabilities of the known labs. If you think it's a lot to go out and do the epi investigation, once everybody starts wanting to move pigs again and needs a negative test, there's going to be a bunch of samples headed towards labs. I think one of the other main points from that as well is that resources for sampling sites were quickly maxed out by the state and the federal authorities. Just the amount of personnel that they had to go out and collect samples on the initial outbreaks. I know Pam and several other people are working on developing some sort of a certification plan so that people in the industry could be certified ahead of time to collect and take samples under the, I believe it would be under the direction and supervision of a accredited veterinarian, so that we can do the epi work, do the movement work as quickly as possible, and move forward from there. The last thing, and I apologize, I was taking some notes as Heidi was talking to you because her thoughts spurred a couple of mine. On the EMR system, that was actually a pleasant surprise. That system worked really well, I thought, in the exercise. It was fairly easy to go in and use, assuming you'd preloaded your sites. So it would be a plug for people to get their sites preloaded into EMRs, do that ahead of time. However, when we did get ready to start permitting stuff, realized that there was some stuff that forgotten to permit, like feed mills. So if you're in an area, if you have a site that's affected or is in a control zone, everything on and off that site has to be permitted, which includes feed. If your feed mill isn't in the EMR's database, you can't request a permit to haul to that farm. It's much better and much easier if you've got all of those sites in there ahead of an outbreak versus trying to be someone that's entering it after the outbreak when the rest of the world's trying to enter their sites as well. So from an industry standpoint, the more information, packing plants, feed mills, whatever else could potentially be permitted, AI centers, the more of those that are in that database to start with, the easier and more functional that database would be at the time that we would need it. So, Heidi asked, does the feed mill need a premise ID? I don't think it does. You can get one, I think, for a feed mill, but I thought after the exercise they said as well that you may not have to have a premise ID for some of those. I think that was still a question. Don't take my word for that. That's one of the still working it out. But I think in Iowa you can permit or get a premise ID for a feed mill. Thank you.
All right. Can we hold the question?
Actually, just a comment, just a point of clarification. Since we got somebody here who works a lot with EMRs, they would need a premise ID number in order to get that permit for the feed mill.
All right, thank you. That was a great overview of some of the challenges that we faced in the exercise, and also it brings up the point that this was a 14-state exercise, as we've said, and it was a really good opportunity for the animal health officials and industry to interact in all 14 states. So it was a pretty massive exercise, that it wasn't just one state exercising within the state. It was a lot of discussions that happened amongst the states, too. So that was a positive of the exercise. So our final panelist is Dr. Pete Thomas. Pete is the Director of Health Services for Iowa Select Farms. He graduated from Iowa State College of Veterinary Medicine in 2007. And prior to joining the team at Iowa Select, he spent time in private practice in Minnesota and with Smithfield Foods.
All right, thanks, Pam. Well, I don't know if I'm going to be as exciting as the first speaker. I'm not talking about you, Pam, the other guy who was in here. But so hopefully, I guess, a few things that I want to talk about are kind of some things that we learned and kind of look at as important thought processes around what you would do in terms of handling your business or your system, your operation with African swine fever. And just kind of curious, I know I recognize some faces in here, and I know some are not working with production companies or our producers or independent producers, but are there a lot of people in here that work for production companies or work for different systems or independent producers or people with barns? Okay, curious. Show your hands if you're out working with pigs. Yeah. So it looks like some people, but maybe a lot of people not necessarily related to that. So hopefully, if there are, this will kind of give maybe some tips or some ways we've looked at it and some things to go back and look at your operation, because I think going through this exercise, we three all had an opportunity, and it was a great opportunity for us that other producers have not had an opportunity to have, and so it's really, it was able to let us learn some things about our systems. So this is for Iowa Select Farms, this is our geographic footprint. So as you can see, we operate in 48 counties in Iowa, and all the shaded in counties, those would be counties where we would have farms, so finishing sites or sow farms or multiplication sites, and then the ones that would have a sow there, that would be areas where we would have sows located. The size of the sow would be correspond with the kind of number of sows we'd have in those areas. So as you can see, we have a lot of pigs in Iowa. We have one farm in Nebraska, but generally speaking, all of our pigs are in Iowa, in hog-dense parts of Iowa, although I'm not sure there's too many non-hog-dense parts of Iowa either. But when we think about African swine fever for our business, Iowa's the biggest pig-producing state, and we're the biggest producer in the state, so we're probably as at risk, or at least as at risk as any other producer in terms of being somebody to be impacted by African swine fever based off our location and the number of farms. So to us, it was really important to take this opportunity and use this exercise as close as we could to the real thing. So, I think I want to talk a little bit about communication and then kind of through thinking about the epidemiology workups, because I think those are two very important pieces right away, in the event of an outbreak. And so the way we set it up is just two of us, our COO and myself, knew how we were going to kind of roll with this exercise. There's a lot of people who knew we were participating, but not necessarily how. And so what we did is that Sunday night before it started, we sent out some communication to the production directors and our health services team saying, hey, you got to be we got emergency, you need to be on a conference call at like 7:30 on a Sunday night. So just kind of see what kind of response we get. We got just about everybody on, and of course everybody was a little bit worried, this must be something pretty serious going on. But then, we talked about, this is just an exercise, but we're treating it as though it's a real thing. So here's what's going on. What do we got to start thinking about right away? Who do we need to start getting in contact with, like tonight yet, and first thing tomorrow morning, and some of those things. And so it really helped us kind of treat it as though it was a real thing and start those lines of communication. And I don't think you really understand what all goes into that, because I know we definitely, as we reflected back, a day into it, realized. So I'll just give one example of some communication we missed. It seems like the most obvious. We started thinking about, okay, this farm's positive or likely positive. Where do these pigs go? And we started working, on that, right away. What's touched his farms? Where are those things gone? And then we missed, the most obvious one of, we had just gotten gilts into that site a couple weeks before. We didn't go back and plan on going back and testing that site or asking what was going on at that site. Super obvious. And we realized it fairly quickly, but not immediately, which in the event of an outbreak, you need to, because we would have shipped gilts out of that farm again that Monday morning, you know. So some of the things, you know, some of the gaps and some of the things regarding all the communication that needs to take place, I don't think you can get unless you kind of try to go through this exercise on your own as well. So it's something that I would highly recommend people, anybody in this room who works as a producer, works within a production company, to take that back and think about how do you put some stress on your own system. So we had set up a USDA, we call it the USDA FAD alert at iowaselect.com email address. So any communication that anybody sent was to be CC'd with that email address. And then a couple of us had a ability to send notes or send emails out from that email address as well. And so we were able to capture, document all the communication, at least the email that took place throughout the course of the week with this exercise, and really involved a lot of people throughout a bunch of different departments. I think really kind of gave everybody in our system, you know, people who thought, you know, they probably had nothing to do with this, whether it's IT or maybe, you know, a sow farm that was completely unrelated, you know, gave them an opportunity to be involved. And so, you know, some of the examples, you know, some of these people, so with our epi investigations, our IT department helped a ton. And that's one thing we realized. We had done some kind of work with them ahead of time to get some reports generated. And that was very helpful to get a list of potential dangerous contacts. But the other thing we realized is connecting the dots is also important. And so working with our IT department to try to make some better reports and some things that would really help us. Because, you know, if we have a farm break with PRRS and we go through a disease investigation, I mean, you know, it's a little bit time consuming, but it's not like you're trying to go through a lot of sites. But when you're in the middle of crisis mode and you're trying to figure out what may have touched, you know, 10 sites or something, you know, time is of the essence, and being able to connect all those dots together as automated as possible is important. So that was a team that maybe we hadn't thought about being so important and critical, that spent a lot of their time that week doing some programming and helping us change some things, and since then as well. You know, nutrient management was very involved, and so it just so happened the site we were at, there had been some guys pumping there and had left some stuff on that site. And, you know, interestingly enough, when we showed up at that site that morning, they'd already had communication to those guys, hey, we know you're at that site, where have you been since you were there? And they had actually shown up because they had some equipment still there to try to get it out of there before we got there that day. You know, so again, communication, clear expectations about what, you know, what you can do and what you can't. Even though they knew it was an exercise, they still thought, oh crap, we're not gonna be able to get our trailer out of here if we don't get there, you know, at like 7 o'clock to get it out of there before people show up. So clear communication about what the expectations are. One thing we looked at was communication with our sow farms around. So of course we had a 3-day standstill order, right? So which means nobody in the state could move a pig for 3 days, 72 hours. And you know, we have sows that are bred and ready to farrow, and you know, when you start getting your mind wrapped around everything that goes on throughout the course of this week, and you say, wow, are we really going to even figure this out in 72 hours? I mean, 72 hours is just the minimum. But if the state says, well, now we know that this site, these pigs went here, and this could have touched this, and they're still trying to work through the epi, that could easily be extended. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these animal movements were extended longer than that. So we told every sow farm to work on a plan to be able to wean pigs, hold pigs in the farm, and not wean a sow for 7 days, or not be able to move a pig for 7 days. And then also how we're going to breed if we can't get semen into the farm. So do we breed a sow one service, half a dose, one service per sow? How do we try to keep production going in the event? So every sow farm had to put together a plan during the course of the week on how they were going to manage their farm through a 7-day standstill without being able to move an animal off, and without being able to get semen on the farm. Kind of to change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the epi, and Ian had touched on it a little bit, but I think that one of the most critical pieces regarding, you know, if we have an African swine fever break, and you know, is the ability to do accurate and timely epidemiology investigations within your own system. So I'm not talking about the state of Iowa or the USDA coming in and doing that for you, but taking the responsibility as producers to be able to do this on our own. And so The two reasons why it's absolutely critical is, number one, if we have it in a site, how long is it going to take till we spread that to another site? And if it is spread to one or two other sites before we realize that we have it, we still have an opportunity to shut it down. But if we don't realize where all the dangerous contacts are that may have touched that site, Ian talked a little bit about the mowing, but there's a lot of things on that list. And the quicker we can identify those and not let something go that we didn't recognize, the more opportunity we have to minimize the spread within our system or to other systems. And the better chance we have to actually shut this disease down rather than live with it and have it spread to a proportion like China has. And then the other reason is for business continuity. So when we had our site infected, the state of Iowa immediately put us on every single site in our system on a quarantine. 800 sites were on quarantine. And originally what they told us is you need to go test all 800 sites to get them off quarantine. Which, and then you talked about one site and what that would do. And as we talked through that, they said, well, you either need to prove to us that because, they would assume you're all guilty by association. Your Iowa Select Farms, every single one of your sites is a potential, you're all the same system, so we're going to treat them all as though they're dangerous, which is probably not a bad idea. But how do we get back to business as usual? How do we not just completely shut down our whole operation? And so I think the number one thing is to be able to prove to them that you didn't have any contact with the affected site. And so being able to do the EPI and provide that to the state and provide them a list of sites that are of high risk or medium risk or low risk, and then the list of sites that had absolutely no contact or no association, they'll allow you then to be able to remove sites and get back to normal on those sites as quickly as possible, and then allow you to focus right away on, okay, now I know I need to get out and test these 10 sites or something like that, rather than trying to test 800 sites. So the number one thing I think, if you do get quarantine put on, is to be able to prove a lack of association between sites and be able to do the EPI work, just for a business continuity standpoint. And so prior to the exercise, we had kind of put together a list of everything that we thought touched the farm. And so the list probably is not comprehensive, but it's as comprehensive as what we could come up with. And if anybody wants the list that we had come up with, feel free to shoot me a note and I can send you that list of items that touch the farms. But things like mowing, things you don't think of on a daily basis. And then the other thing is, I have a kind of a funny story, probably against my better judgment to tell it, but so you think about things like load crews, and who's on your load crews, if you have load crews, or if you got even just a few contract sites and you have that contractor's in charge of loading out your pigs, well, he's probably got somebody helping him. You may not know who that person is or what else they do. So I was at one of our finishing sites. We were looking at kind of a way to load out pigs and minimize spread of PED back into barns. So I went out and met a couple guys from Iowa State out there, and we got some processes that are supposed to be in place for our truck drivers and our load crews. I thought, well, this will be good. We'll demonstrate what we're doing now and how we're supposed to be doing it, So I get out there and the truck driver shows up. And he's got a gal in the cab with him, and his dog's running all around the site. Well, you wouldn't even think of those people touching the site. Well, and he got out and he's getting ready to get in the truck. I'm like, oh, do you always bring your wife or your girlfriend with you? He goes, oh, no, she's not either one of those. And I thought, oh, I don't know where else she might have been, And then he gets going and he didn't really know who I was. I didn't really tell him who I was. And he's kind of on and off the trailer. And I said, are you supposed to stay on the trailer? Oh, no, Iowa Select doesn't have that policy, which, I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to get out and look at some of this stuff more often. Well, I'm about, halfway through the load, that gal in the truck must have got to missing him pretty good because she comes around just with her shoes on, hops up the load chute and gets in the trailer with him. And now they can't even really get the pigs into the trailer because she's, decided to help him load hogs, I guess. And so, and so it was quite the interesting experience. And meanwhile, that dog's running all over the place. So, sometimes, you really need to kind of look and say, okay, this is, here's something on my list, but what all goes into that and what might I be missing? I know that this is a load crew, but who's really all on that load crew? Where else have they been? I just talked to somebody today, works for another production company, and they said they knew that one of their caretakers was loading some pigs for us on the side too. So there's always these things you don't realize, and some of those connections are probably the most critical connections because they're not our site supervisors or managers who are more than likely doing things the right way. They're things that people who have not had training in our biosecurity processes and protocols, and so thinking through all those things, because some of those risks and connection points might be even more dangerous than what we realized. And so trying to identify those, and so we've had a lot of meetings with drivers, with our load crew supervisors on our expectations and proper processes, and we've actually implemented some bonus programs in some of our independent contractors with the incentive of doing things the right way. And if you get caught, you lose all your bonus. So trying to think through things the right way there. I put a list down here of some things that the state had a working group and that they put as high-risk items. So some things to think about in your operations is the main things. But so obviously entry and exit of live animals is a very high risk. Animal products, so semen would be the main one on that list. Potentially food items that would come in a farm. Mortality collection by rendering. Regular employee entry, so supervisors might be there once a week, or employees that are there on a regular basis, and then also any history of international travel. So that's their list. If you think about what are the main things to focus on and think about in terms of what they want to see for high priority stuff when you're doing your epi investigations to try to clear a site, that would be the list of high priority items, the stuff to take care of first. And so, like I said, I think if we sit here and expect, well, when I break, the state or the USDA is just going to do my epidemiological investigation for me, you're wrong. They expect you to give them the information, but they're going to be overwhelmed within a matter of an hour, in terms of trying to put stuff. And plus, you got all the information. They're going to have to try to extract it back out of you. So it's every producer's responsibility to be able to do that on their own. And I think everybody's got to take that responsibility serious and be prepared to take that on if they do break. One thing we're doing in our system, and we had a good system in place where we have a lot of site information. We have an internal kind of intranet set up where we have all of our site information, all of our site visitors. This is an example of a sign-in log where if I go to a farm, the farm signs me in. I got a card number. They know who I am. We're working on systems by which there's more automated sign-ins for people who come to our site, whether it's load crews or whoever, so we know they've been there. We would have GPS on our vehicles and geofences so that if you're there within so many feet for so long, but you could also even have an app on a phone where it would log your personal location as being at that site. Different things to automatically log you into the site. Trying to capture things like site visits. So there's a vet site visit, production visits. There's an animal well-being audit there. So we can track who's been at the site and filled out a report, maintenance tickets, all that stuff has all gone through our internal system. And so it's all captured electronically. We can run some reports, like here's a transportation report that I can run in a matter of a minute with, I pulled out trailer 412, where's that trailer been? And even trying to develop that further to where if I put in the site, it tells me the trailers, the trucks, the drivers that have been at that site, and then where were they 2 sites before and 2 sites after. So working through a lot of stuff to try to connect dots and make it as automated as possible. Is something that we're working with in our system. And then we have had a couple other producers that have seen kind of what we do from an internal standpoint and have come to us. The problem is, it's not really an out-of-the-box software program. People have asked, hey, can we get this type of program, or what do you? And it's something we've worked with on our own, but we have worked with some other producers. We're starting to kind of, our sister company, Hanson Eggs, doing some stuff with their programmers, trying to work with other production companies to help them do some of the same things. So if you did, some of this stuff is kind of daunting, and I know not everybody has the capabilities in an IT department, but if there is something, not trying to put a plug in, but there is an opportunity to talk to Hanson Egg. It's an opportunity to at least try to take some of the same thought process and put it to good use. But at the very least, if you can make a list, like I showed a couple slides back, an automated list where you can figure out all those things that have touched and how you're going to track that stuff and think through those processes. I think that's critical and that's important. So just in summary, an FAD outbreak is going to require good planning and coordination, and expect everyone in your operation to be involved in the response plan, and try to go through an exercise where you can get them involved in thinking through their role as much as possible, make it as real as possible. Have good plans for business continuity. Being able to do the epidemiology will be able to get your sites off quarantine. Being able to demonstrate what's been at your site and where it's gone and where it came from, that's going to be critical and be able to start moving pigs again if you get all your sites put under a quarantine. And then good communication with everybody on your team and your staff. I mean, those are the things that I think are the most key things that we took away from this exercise.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. If you have any for our panelists, we do have the cube here in the back of the room I'm going to go get, and we ask that you make sure that you ask your question in there so everyone can hear. And then our speakers have microphones. Could have just thrown it. See, that's... I wouldn't have guaranteed to catch it. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Pam, this is actually for you. Explain EMERS a little bit. I just always assumed when you got a premise ID number from the state of Iowa that it automatically went into EMERS. Is that true or not true?
So for the state of Iowa, they have been transferring, and correct me if this is wrong, but my understanding is that the state of Iowa has been transferring the premises identification numbers into EMERS. So the state, those in Iowa have been transferred in.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess I'd address this one to Pete to start with. You talked about business continuity and what if on a standstill it's not just 3 days but 7 days, having your farms planned for no pig movement. What about on the feed side? If there's no feed, I mean, conversations with growers, conversations with feed mills, what does that look like for business continuity?
Yeah, I mean, I think, getting a hard answer from the state, I think there's going to be a lot of different situations that could occur. So, for example, if there's a backyard producer in the state of Washington that breaks, and there's no connection to the state of Iowa, that feed standstill is going to get lifted probably very soon. And again, there's no hard, this is exactly what's going to happen. You don't get that exact language. I think it's very fluid. But my understanding would be more than likely if it's the index case is somewhere like in central Iowa and there's a feed mill associated with it, they're going to look very hard at that mill, what's gone into that mill, and maybe associated mills with it. So I think they're going to try to roll back on the feed thing and try to get that moving fairly quickly, but there might be some specific mills or groups of mills or mills that have gotten a similar type product in where they may keep them shut down even longer. But that's, again, just through some informal discussion of what may happen in the state. But I think they'll try to get feed moving at a pretty reasonable time frame. But they want to make sure they kind of look at where that risk could have come from and if that's real.
Yeah, I guess I would say in some of our conversations as well, after the exercise, we'd thrown out the idea of having offload trucks. So for the quarantine area, for them to think about and consider moving forward so that you could still get feed into a control area and into the animals in those areas, but those trucks wouldn't leave that area. So some sort of a ferry truck that brings it out, offloads onto that truck, and then would stay in the zone. For them to at least consider and look at putting that into the plan going forward so that there's other ways besides just coming straight out of the mill.
We have a question in the back of the room. If I played softball, I might actually try to throw it to you, but...
So in the event of an outbreak and then the resulting movement restriction order, is it going to be a requirement to have a secure pork supply plan to get permitted for movement?
That might be a better question for Pam. My understanding right now is in the state of Iowa, that won't be a requirement. Although they are supportive of everyone having one, they won't take in those plans and verify them as far as a requirement for a permit. But Pam, you probably speak better to that.
So when we talk about a secure pork supply plan, if we're talking about biosecurity, about specifically a biosecurity plan, I think, like Pete said, that having a biosecurity plan is in the best interest of every producer to make sure that you're keeping the disease out. but it's really hard to verify that biosecurity is being done every day on the farm. So how would you verify that there's a plan in place? There's some states that are going through and evaluating biosecurity plans and signing off if they feel that it's a good biosecurity plan. But you know, if you're the producer, if you're the veterinarian, who's going to sign off and saying it's done every day? I'm sure that our panelists, as Pete talked about with the driver, that there may be situations where you have a really good plan in place and you're pretty sure it's being followed, but somebody throws you a loop and brings the dog to the site. And so it's kind of one of those things that here's what's expected, here's the plan. You want everybody to follow it. You want to train everybody prior to an outbreak to make sure that they're following the biosecurity on the site. But it's a tough thing to decide who would actually sign off that the plan's being done every day. So I think that that's the discussion item that people are going to continue as we move forward, that biosecurity plan is very important, and how do we reinforce that? But is there a level of verification, you know, at some point down the road?
I talked a couple weeks ago, and they said, you know, they're meeting with all the other states again in February, and by this time they have no specific what. Right now they would not have a requirement, and if something changes and they did have something, it might come. They might decide that after their meeting in February, but. And I think initially they were saying that they were going to require secure pork supply plan. At least I have some paperwork that said that, so that was the path everybody was going down. So I think that's kind of a frustrating thing for a lot of producers, the time and investment they put into that, you know.
One of the things, aside from the time and investment, is it does sort of start the conversation or give you a conversation tool with, say, a grower whose bins are at the end of a building, and that's also the door they take their deads out. So, for example, if this is a fomite spread disease, just getting people to change their behavior to take their dead out the other end of the building can be a positive thing of having done the secure pork supply, just so that your feed truck drivers don't be walking in the same traffic as dead animal removal from a barn.
Well, and there was a quote in one of the magazines recently of a speaker at one of the meetings, and he says we have three things. It was something along the lines of we have three things to help control ASF: biosecurity, 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 and not necessarily in that order. So, you know, it's so many countries, they talk about it being a disease that's moved around by people. We move it, whether we move animals, whether we move the carcasses, whether we move the trucks or ourselves. We're the ones that are moving the disease around. So that's where biosecurity is so important.
I've got a good voice.
I think they want to, they can record it that way.
What have they done on the packer side of things? You come from a quarantine, not a quarantine site, but a site that has got an outbreak, and that truck has taken it to the packing house or the slaughterhouse. Does that slaughterhouse become quarantined, or how are you handling that, I guess?
So you're saying animals came out of the site that's suspected or is positive?
Or was suspected and then became positive, whatever.
According to the way I understand it, that would then be they'd be linked, and there would probably be some testing and verification of that plant then.
Quarantine for that plant then? I mean,
Well, for the way the exercise went, and according to the plans as they're laid out today, for 72 hours, nothing moves. Whether it's a market animal, it's semen, manure, it doesn't matter. If it's got anything to do with a pig, it's not moving. And that includes, as I understand it, out of the packing plants as well.
Yep, they'd investigate the packing plant level too.
And the plants, all materials out of the plants are going to stop, I believe, for 3 days. But they won't be processing anyway, so that's probably not as big a deal for them.
but it's huge. I mean,
Sure, it's huge. Yeah, there has to be a testing protocol for the plant and a way to certify that it's free after it's been emptied and cleaned, and they've gone through their cleanup process. There has to be a verification step in there as well that facility is then clean and free of ASF before, as I understand it, they'd be allowed to process again.
And I might
Fair.
just add that there's work being done on determining just how to clean up a slaughter plant. You know, not something that we've had to do before. So that's in progress. But also, I think just comment on product that's come from animals that passed ante and postmortem inspection should be allowed to move, because we want consumers to realize that product that's passed ante and postmortem inspection is safe for human consumption. It's not a human disease risk, and we want that consumer to feel comfortable with that. So we don't want to send a mixed message and say product can't go out if it's passed ante and postmortem inspection.
All right.
I think also one of the parts is that we still have to develop testing protocols. I don't know of a testing protocol for a facility at this point, whether it's a plant or a finisher site or any of that. Environmental sampling is probably the better word for it. That's approved. Is that?
Still under development. You're right.
All right, I think we're going to have to stop there due to time constraints. I want to thank our producers who participated in the exercise as well as coming today and sharing their thoughts.